So I I've
Recording in
started the recording.
progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today is April 15th meeting of the Finance Committee. And since we're conducting this meeting virtually, my first order to call the meeting to announce we have a quorum and call the meeting to order, but to make sure that every member can hear and be heard. So I will just call out your names. Bob,
Present.
Andy,
Present.
Mandy,
Present.
Tom,
Present.
Alicia.
Here.
And the only person we're missing is Bernie, and I can't remember whether he told me he wasn't able to come. So I think we will start, and we're starting usually these agendas with public comments. We have two referrals from the council. One is the regional schools, both the budget, the assessment method, and capital. We're not going to do an analysis and vote today on those. We are going to do a discussion of questions we will have. And so Mandy, I think, has already done a draft, and Mandy, I'll ask you to share those. And if we have any additional, that meeting in terms of budget review is scheduled for May 8th, along with the elementary school. So the other item that we have on referral is the guidelines that was referred to us with a suggested amendment to the guidelines. And then the third topic is just to be discussing the order of what we're doing of various agendas for the budget review. And I sent everyone out the what Melissa has put together, and she can show it on the screen for which departments are on which day, and everyone had volunteered for what section of the budget they wanted. And just for Tom had told me he was going to be gone a chunk of time, so I had him double team with Bob for a time that he would be back in town. So that would be the two of you working together. So that's the agenda for today, unless there's something I don't know on late breaking in the last 48 hours. So Melissa, did I miss anything on the agenda?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we're going to start with public comments. So we're open for public comments now and we have attendees. If any of you would like to make a comment, as always, we will entertain up to 3 minutes, and we won't be responding, but we will be listening. And if you raise your hand, I will call on you. I am not seeing anyone in the audience raising their hand. So we can begin. And I'm not sure the best way to do this. Mandy, maybe you could lead off with regional. The one other item, I had a quick conversation with Lynn just before this meeting, when she was asking me when we would be discussing regional and when we'd be voting it out, our recommendation, and I told her it would be on the 8th. So she is planning on scheduling a hearing on May 19th, which would be the council meeting. And so we can, as we're talking about that, that would give us enough time to have our discussion, make a referral, have a hearing, and have the council vote. So that is, I don't think that's been scheduled yet, but that was the quick discussion when she called and when we were meeting. So Mandy, I'll start with you both for scheduling and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the full budget hearing, not just the regional school hearing that would be on May 19th. I feel like any full budget hearing needs to, I need to pull up a calendar, but should not be on a council meeting night because it's going to take up the whole meeting potentially. And it's our hearing.
So
now I'm confused.
So maybe Lynn is in the audience. Melissa, maybe we can bring Lynn in. Lynn, if you're willing to look at the calendar, because I don't have an answer to that question.
And wasn't a hearing already noticed for next Monday?
Lynn will have the answer to that as well. Lynn, I think you have joined us.
First of all, thank you for inviting me in. Let me just look quickly at the schedule. You can hold your hearing whenever you want. We had initially talked about it even being as early as the 28th, and I think there was some concern about doing that because of not having the other budget at that point. Sometimes we've held these together. On one or two occasions, we've not. We did hold May 19th as a hearing on the town manager's budget. And at this point, believe it or not, I don't have anything else scheduled that date. So if the finance committee wanted to do that on the 19th, they could, or they could move it to another date.
So the other question I have is, if that hearing is on capital, it's too late for us to actually have a choice on capital for the regional school district.
Right.
Because that needs voted by May 14th.
Right. So another option on the public hearing on the budget is the 12th. When is your meeting? You're going to do the budget?
On the 8th. Tuesday, Tuesday the 8th is when we
Yeah.
do the two education. And, Mandy, when you asked about capital, I had a question of capital. If we wanted to make a decision on capital today, we could make a recommendation on capital because it sits on its own piece. So when we got to these, it doesn't involve other pieces because I know there's a timeline on that if we fail to act, it exists. So I see Andy's hand is up also. So this is, Andy, let's stay with scheduling when we're doing what with regional, okay?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, it's not been my recollection that we have felt that there was a need to do a hearing on the question of capital, mostly because it's not for the current year, and it's also one of these things that you're either going to say no and veto it, or just let it go. We don't even have to positively vote. So we haven't in the past, but Mandy, you might have your hands up, you may have an opinion.
No, the capital is an approval order, not a financial order. I'm not sure a hearing needs done on capital, but we should make sure that I agree, Kathy. I think I have exactly one question for capital, and it doesn't really relate to the number at all. So it doesn't really need answered regarding before getting to a recommendation on this approval order for capital. But I feel like in the past, we've affirmatively voted approval just to have it on the record instead of sort of a pocket approval as a
exactly
council. And I would hate for us to forget that practice because we just couldn't get it on a council schedule in time. I mean, it's one thing for the council to decide to affirmatively say we're going to pocket approve it. It's another thing for finance to not return it to council in time so that it can't be done that way. So I'd be okay with moving capital forward today. But, expecting that the question that still remains that I have with capital will get answered when we have the school staff here. I support holding one public hearing on all of the budget, which includes this portion of the budget and all. I would like that hearing earlier rather than later personally, because I think as Finance Committee discusses the parts of the budget, we should hear from the public before we fully discuss them. And so I am concerned that a May 19th is too late for us as a Finance Committee to really take into account the concerns of the public before we're writing our report. So I would like to see a public hearing on the manager's budget that would include the regional school well before the 19th.
And Lynn, at one point, the date that had been floated, I just have my little notes, it was May 12th, the Monday in between the introduction.
Yes, there's no council meeting scheduled that night. Mondays are often seen as kind of the best time to get people to focus on council stuff. So if finance wants to grab that for the hearing, that's good. At that point, let me just mention that both Leverett and Pelham will have held their meetings. I think they know what they're expecting from us. And Shutesbury is not until the 31st. So we may end up voting the regional budget separately, but you have to hold the hearing first. So I would grab May 12th if I were you.
Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, because it's not currently on any schedule, but we can schedule it. So it's the entire budget then, not the capital plan. The capital plan would be separate still, correct?
You can do both at that. You can do all of it at that time.
Mandy's nodded.
The capital plan is a public forum, I believe, of the town council, whereas the operating budget is a public hearing of the finance committee.
We're talking about two different capital plans. The capital plan for the region.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant the capital improvement plan, the 5-year, the biggie.
That's a public forum.
Okay.
And at this point, let me just tell you when we've tentatively scheduled that. We've tentatively scheduled public forum on capital improvement on June 2nd. It's two different forms.
So I think, that one is an official one. We can resend these calendars once Lynn is put in, I guess we put in the hearing. So then on the regional capital budget, today, when we get to that piece, we could say whether the finance committee is recommending approval and get that back on the council agenda for, I guess the next council meeting is April 28th.
It is.
Okay, so it would be it'll be a report, and then, at that point, we will know when we're doing each of these pieces, so we'll also be able to tell the whole council which part of the budget is on what day in May. And Lynn, you've often said to the extent we wanted to make it a joint meeting, if enough people wanted to come, we could make it a joint meeting, so people will know which parts of the budget are on which day.
Right. So are we agreeing then on May 12th, you would do the finance committee hearing on all of the budget, if you will?
Yes.
And it would be a committee of the whole, Kathy, is that what you're saying?
I think so. I mean,
Okay.
I don't see any reason not to make it a committee of the whole.
And 6:30?
6:30. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I go back to the audience?
Melissa controls you.
I don't.
She's the puppet master.
mm,
So Mandy sent in, I mean, she actually looked at today's meeting and she said, we're really going to have a full discussion of the regional budget, because we don't actually have a regional budget yet. We have the ending point of the regional budget with a number and an assessment method. So I think maybe Paul was here, and now I see him, Paul is still here, but I think we were going to request that when the school comes on the 8th, that we get a budget. And I don't know whether you've transmitted that request to Shannon and Dr. G yet. Usually there's a document that comes.
I sent it out to the council.
Okay, so we have a
It-
full.
It's
Okay,
on the town's website too.
it's on the,
I
okay,
can
so
I can resend it. Yeah.
that's okay. We'll just make sure we put it in the finance packet for that day as well.
the
So
file's too big. I can put the link in there.
okay,
Yeah.
as long as we have a link to it, Melissa, we don't need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the budget, just so you're aware, when you look at the budget, it's the budget that the superintendent submitted. And then the school committee took action to reduce it and make changes to it. So they didn't revise the entire budget. So it's the original presentation to the regional school district committee.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you. And, if people don't know where that is, we can do an email so you know where to look for that. Bernie?
Hi, I just wanted to note my presence and that I can be.
Oh, Bernie is here.
I didn't, I'm sorry for the late appearance, but
Thank
that's
you,
what
Bernie.
happens to you when you're making other plans. And I would appreciate having links to everything, because if it's posted to the council, it doesn't necessarily get to myself or Tom. Thank you.
So Mandy, do you want to lead off? I mean, we could do this one or two ways. Mandy has, I would call it a fairly extensive list of questions. And so this is part of when we did our organization, who would take what part of the budget. Mandy said she'd be willing to do education and the two parts. And she, anticipating that we might be having a full discussion today, did a set of questions. And what I thought is, we could go through them now quickly, and then to the extent people have anything to add, they would just send them to Mandy, and then one set will go through Melissa to Shannon to whomever. So does that work for you, Mandy, to talk
Sure.
about what your questions were? Yeah.
Sure. I'll split it up because I did in the email I originally sent to Kathy and Paul and Melissa, which was questions for town staff and then questions for the school committee and school staff. The town staff ones, it looks like some of them have already been answered. So I will acknowledge that, which was, I was asking for the financial order for the regional budget assessment, which is in today's packet. So I do have a question on that financial order, but I asked that it be provided so we could see it. I asked for the manager's recommendation on when we vote, but we kind of dealt with that already in a little bit. And then I was asking for, since I thought today we would be discussing it, it won't be as, it could change. If we're not discussing schools till May 8th, which is the day after about 8 days after we actually get the manager's budget. I wanted a new projection sheet showing with the recent vote at the council regarding increases to the year-over-year budgets above 4% for each of the school lines, where the decreases would be in a typical projection sheet, since our last projection sheet was from the beginning of March, I guess, March 5th. So I wanted to see what the projection was to give us an idea and an ability to talk about the effect of a 4.81% year-over-year increase above the FY25 budget. So that was another question for the manager to ask to provide that. But if we're not talking about this till May 8th, we'll have more information than just the projection sheet at that point. We'll know exactly what was done. And then the one question I had that I thought might be staff but might be school was, in the regional budget, there was an indication that Title I grants for the region and for Pelham and the Pelham district and for the Amherst district are all being held in the town of Amherst. The regional school district budget book on page 130 stated that. And so I had a question as to why the town of Amherst is holding Title I money for the region, particularly the region, and I mean, Pelham comes into that too, instead of the region holding its own Title I money. And so that was my questions for town staff. For school committee, I had
Mandy, do you want to take a pause in case they have an answer for that right now, or do you want to wait till you're finished?
I mean, if they want to answer it, but I thought we were just going over what I was asking because they wouldn't have questions. So they wouldn't have answers today. For the school committee or staff, I asked about what the school district is doing to adjust expenses over the long term to address the reality that costs are increasing above the ability for revenues to increase. And I asked questions about, there was at a recent council meeting, a school committee member, regional school committee member, referenced the cuts list from FY21 to 25, indicating that the school district has cut nearly $49 9 FTEs over the last 5 fiscal years, yet the budget books for FY25 and 26 show that that the FY20 there were 308 FTEs, and in FY25 there were 319 FTEs, which is an increase of 11 FTEs, not the perceived 49 FTE decrease. So I was asking them to explain how their reference to all the cuts that they seem to discuss year after year on FTEs results in actual more staff in FY25 than in FY20. Similar question about student enrollment has declined in that time by 11.5% overall in the region. SPED staffing in that time has increased by 10%. Gen Ed staffing has decreased by just over 9%, and total staffing has increased by just over 1%. I asked, my question at that point is, what point should staffing decreases adjust to reflect student enrollment decreases? So again, going with that sort of enrollment staffing mismatch. I asked a question about what the status of amending the regional agreement to recognize Amherst's government appropriately, accurately, and respectfully in our regional agreement is from the school staff, since it still refers to town meetings in all 4 towns and select boards in all 4 towns. There were 3 parts of the actual budget book, 3 departments that concerned me. The first one was the superintendent's office budget that has a projected increase of over 60% from the FY25 budget. So I asked for an explanation of that 60% increase in the superintendent's office budget, including since the superintendent's office budget is presumably shared amongst the 3 districts, what the budgets in those other 2 districts also look like in the superintendent's office for those line items. The HR and diversity department was proposing an increase of 15% for FY25, and in both the superintendent's office and the HR office, staffing was projected to remain the same. So it wasn't like you could point this to, oh, staffing's going from 3 to 4 positions or 3 to 5 positions or something. They were projected to remain the same, but the department superintendents was projecting a 60% increase in the budget, all in salaries, and the HR department was projecting a 15% increase. So I again asked them to explain that, including referencing the other 2 districts' budgets for those lines. Utilities is an interesting one. In FY24, utilities was under $100,000, and the proposed FY26 budget, as well as the adopted FY25 budget, is expenses of over about $700,000. When you look at the line items, it gets very interesting. So mainly, I'm asking for an explanation as to moreover, why FY24 was low. Where were those utilities being paid for? Because they had 0 expenses for electricity and natural gas, I believe. But they clearly had electricity in the buildings. So I just asked for what's going on with the utilities and why is it so fluctuating when they did not in the budget book identify any reasons why the general line is fluctuating so much. Presumably that is being paid for by something. I had a lot of questions about athletics regarding athletic fees and whether they pay for the full program, whether the fee increase that the school committee has adopted will reduce the amount of general fund support the athletics program receives, because it appears that the fees do not cover the full cost of the program. The athletic revolving fund is actually a negative balance, so I had a question about that. And they had indicated that the Amherst College money for education is being used for athletics and student activities. And so I was asking what the reasoning for designating it for athletics and student activities instead of in-school academic facing educational expenses was. And a question regarding if athletics, if the general fund is being used for athletics, the reasoning behind not considering reductions for athletics in order to reduce the reductions required to in-school academic facing services in the general fund. Special education IDEA funds, the trend analysis in the budget book states that the quote sharing of funds between the Amherst region and Pelham also shifts each year. And so I asked for an explanation of the statement, since my understanding of IDEA funds is that they're tied to specific students or programs within a specific district. And so I was confused as to how a IDEA funds that are received because of programs or students in, say, the region get shared with the Pelham school or the elementary school. So I just wanted an explanation of that comment. Again, the item with the Title I grant being held by the town of Amherst for all districts. And then I had some questions about various trends in the revolving funds. And their long-term plan on the use of revolving funds. And finally, with capital, my last question, with capital, it looked to me as if the region only borrows money to fund capital expenses, that they never pay for capital expenses with unborrowed funds, just out of cash. They never ask us, you know, if we look at our capital, our approval order, it's 400 and some $1,000 all in borrowed money, when some of those expenses could just be paid for out of cash. And so I given that borrowing funds for items like that costs money on interest, you know, 15,000 for auditorium house lights, and we're borrowing the money, parking lot repaving at 20,000, and the money is being borrowed. 10,000 for infrared electrical system distribution analysis and repair, just an example, all being borrowed. Why is the district choosing to only borrow money to pay for capitals? It may actually be a law, I don't know, but I thought it was worth asking the question regarding why we always borrow money even for small regional projects instead of just asking the towns to pay cash for those and borrow just for the larger funds. That question, as I said earlier when we were scheduling, does not necessarily relate to whether we recommend approving the planned aggregate principal amount for the capital program for the regions next year, but it is a question I believe worth getting an answer to.
So that is, I would say, as usual, was very comprehensive. I think it would be good if we post those, and then so we have a record that we sent. And I have not looked at the budget to pick up those trends, but I know in the past we've wanted answers, particularly to the staffing and the student trends. And we're going to have similar questions for the elementary school budget, which has always been an issue. And so one thing I don't know, Mandy, is how far back they go, because there was a break at one point where they were, instead of showing, they used to have an other information section. And do they show a section? I can answer this for myself without you looking, but
No.
they used to have a special section on charter school and enrollment, but they also would have one that talked about student enrollment trends over time.
The budget book itself did not seem to have any student enrollment trends. The appendix to the budget book had staffing trends, and in the FY26 budget book, those trends went back to FY21. In the
Okay.
FY25 budget book, they went back to FY20. Between
Okay.
25 and 26, the numbers for FY24 and 25 slightly changed, which is to be expected.
Okay. Thanks.
They moved from budget to actual, sort of, and then from proposed to actual budget. So,
Because I know Shannon keeps those, and so I think maybe in the future it would also be good to just get the student trends, because they certainly for the region, because they're using as part of the computation for the assessment method. So at one point, long ago, I asked, where would I go to find that trend line? And Sean said, oh, it must be here somewhere. And he couldn't find it. So, you know, without piecing it together. So I see there are 1, 2, and 3 hands up. Andy, I'm not sure which order, so it's Andy, then Bernie, and Melissa.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick because it's a process question. But in this and other circumstances, is the intent to send the questions to in this case, the regional schools, so that they're prepared before coming into a meeting with us?
Yes, and I believe these were either were sent or they're going to be sent. And the issue was was anyone going to appear today? And the answer was no. And the time period would have been too short anyway. So yes, that would be the intent, to get, to the extent we can, to get them there before people come. Bernie, you're muted.
Some people prefer I keep the mic off. Mandy, there's a great list of questions. Thank you. I would like to know, maybe add to it, the number of vacant positions that are in the budget this year and the number of vacant positions that have been in previous year's budgets.
Melissa.
I was just going to say that a lot of that trend information on student enrollment and teachers per student is available on the DESE website for both the Amherst school and the Amherst Regional School. I'm trying to find the link to the report, but I can send you that. Like, you know what I mean? Like I believe that somebody was reading in a council meeting the other day, the actual employees that seemed to differ from the budget. And I believe that they were getting that information from the state website, where the school department is required to report how many teachers they have versus administrators and that kind of thing.
And it just last time I looked on DESE, you didn't get the full group of all the paras and the other people working in the building. So you could definitely do teachers and FTE teachers. So I just, I realize we can go over to DESE, but somehow within our data systems, I feel like we ought to be able to see trends and not have to go external, because it's easy to update every year because they're updating it. So it may be a request that's for the future. So Bob, did I see your hand go up or down? No. So that would be the set that would go forward. And I don't know whether anyone had questions about what part of the budget you were doing. To the extent I could, I gave people first choice, and Bob was the only person who gave me 2 choices, and he got his second choice because someone else had his first choice as their only choice. So, Andy is doing public safety. Bernie, it says DPW, but DPW and enterprise funds would be all on one day. And then there's a cluster that's, I would call almost everything else, but that's not direct town services, that's under Dave Zomack, a whole eclectic group. And I thought you could divide those with Tom and just figure out if they're specific. And I haven't figured out yet, I'll let Melissa or Paul figure out, we're not going to have everyone come and speak to their department, especially for the one-person departments. We're going to have more focus on questions of what we're seeing in the budget books. And then I was going to take, and this is a little bit odd because I'm the chair of the Joint Capital Planning Committee, but I was going to take the capital plan, which had no one saying they wanted it. And if we can, we'll move library to that day. And that's the first day after we get the budget, May 6th. So Alicia, if we move library to that day, it would be May 6th because you're on library. So I think that just.
So library did get moved to the 6th as you requested, Kathy.
It did. Okay,
Yep.
so on the 6th, it will be the capital plan and library. So I think we have our schedule. Yeah.
Ask a question? Since the council's getting the budget presentation, I believe on May 5th, Paul, you're sending the budget to the council on May 1 so that we would have time to be able to send questions in for the May 6th and May 8th
So
FinCom
the
hearings
May
before May
6th is
6th.
the May,
Yes.
May 6th is the library so that we already have, and we'll already have the capital plan. So the two earliest ones will have already been submitted before the 1st.
And he's due by May 1st, so we'll have, the book will be up, it just won't be is that correct, Paul? I mean, I know what a struggle this year is.
So you will have the budgets for the library, the Amherst School Committee, and the Regional School Committee. I mean, two of the three are already on the budget page. Our budget will be will be on the budget page on May 1st, and then we'll make our presentation on May 4th.
Okay.
Whatever the date, May 6th, whatever date it is. May 6th.
So Mandy had a request for a new projection sheet. The other request I have, and I think it may be fairly easy, I would love it if we could, when we are starting to look at the budget book, Paul, have a percentage for benefits, a broad-based benefits. And one of the things I noticed is in the enterprise funds, you always calculate that. So I'm not looking for a one-on-one, like there are 3 single-person plans and 4, but you have a percentage markup for the enterprise plans, just to give us a sense, because benefits are over on a whole nother page. So when we're looking at budgets, and we had a number a year or so ago, but with the big increase in insurance, health insurance, I expect that number is higher. So
Yeah,
I'm not looking at it by department. I'm looking at roughly, when we look at salaries plus benefits equal this, and the benefits are some percent add-on.
yeah, I mean, that's not how we, I mean, we'll consider that, because the way we calculate our health insurance specifically is a little bit different than that, because we actually count heads. And then, well, let me talk about it with Melissa and Holly, how that might
Okay.
look.
You know, and it can, there can be a disclaimer that this is not.
Yeah.
This is, if you apply this factor to each department, it's not going to be exactly correct, but it just gives you a sense. And I think it's an important number for people to understand, because
So, Kathy, I think you should know that the enterprise numbers are exact. Well, as exact as they can be. So we do a head count in October, and we apply the head count to the department at that time. Like that is literal, like we do it that way. It's that percentage that you see has been calculated because the enterprise are required to pay for their people. So that is a very, it's very specific, and that it's part of what she does every year. It's not a.
Yeah. No, I realize, so I'm looking for the easiest way for you to do it. So pensions and a few of the others are percentages of salary, and health insurance, I understand, varies by what plans people took. Did they take family? Did they take individual? Did they take anything? So I understand there's not as direct a relationship. So I'm just looking for a rough factor when we're looking at departments.
Okay.
So is there anything else on the general getting ready for the budget cycle, which next time we meet, we will be looking at budgets and budget books? Because then if there's nothing else or no other questions, we have this other referral to us, which is a proposed change in guidelines. Mandy, go ahead.
Shouldn't we vote a recommendation on the approval order?
Okay.
And I actually have a question about the approval order for the regional
That would be great. Thank you. Is there one in?
capital plan.
Yes.
The approval order was in the packet,
Okay.
off the web page, not off of SharePoint. It's just worded weird. Be it ordered by the town council of the town of Amherst that the approval of the aggregate principal vote by that for the purpose of listed below chart. And then there's a chart. It's like, it's not a full sentence. That's all. Like, it's not it's just like be it ordered that that the council approves the, like, it's just not a full sentence. That's all. It's just weird.
I can fix that. I did a cut and paste and I probably,
I figured that.
yeah.
Just by the time it gets to the council, maybe.
Yeah, no, I put that in the packet like 15 minutes ago, so.
Okay, so
And I thank you for that. But yeah, that was my only comment, was it just read weird.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I mean, it's very mild. It fits within our capital budget, you know, if we're gonna talk about specifics.
Mhm.
In some sense, I wish they would be a little more aggressive in repairing their building, but we're not the committee asking for the repairs. We're just going along, you know, we're just saying, can we handle the borrowing?
So do you want to make the motion again? I just pulled it up now, so I know I know what you're talking about.
If no one's got any other comments.
I don't have any comments. You know, my comment is similar to your just general observation that the roof is collapsing and there's mold in the building, and we're looking at none of those items. And maybe, Andy, do you know the answer to Mandy's general question on why is the capital budget of the region always debt? Is it because they bundle it up and just borrow the money for all the small pieces? I know the whole time we've been on the council, this is the way we've seen it.
I think that that's just been their habit of how they tend to do it. I don't think, they have maintenance lines for small things, but anything of significance they do not tend to do out of cash. And it is a part of the operating budget for the year.
Because the list on this gets as small as $10,000, you know, so we're not, the infrared electrical system analysis and repair. So it's a cluster of fairly small items with a few bigger. I'm not objecting to, so I'm fine with making a motion, and I'll second the motion. So the
Okay.
motion is to recommend, yeah.
The motion's to recommend the council approval order FY 26-03, the Amherst Pelham Regional School District capital debt authorization.
I second. Is there any other discussion of it? So I'll call a vote. Bob?
Aye.
Kathy is a yes. Andy?
Yes.
Mandy?
Aye.
Tom?
Yes.
Bernie?
Support.
And Alicia?
Yes.
It's unanimous with both our resident members supporting. So I will write that up as a brief and copy and paste this into the order. So it'll be a short report to the council actually the council doesn't meet for a couple of weeks, but I will get that done. So thank you, Mandy, for not having me jump into the next item. So the next item is a referral to us of a proposed amendment to the guidelines, which the simplest explanation of it, if you look at the red lines, it increases the amount for schools, decreases the amount for town and library, and decreases the amount for capital. Would that be an accurate way of doing a quick summary, Mandy? Who has stared at it more? And it went through a lot of longer discussion at the council and went back to, this was proposed by Anna Devon Gother, and then came back to us as originally proposed by her. Anyone can raise their hand on this one. And I am. Mandy. And we also have the second piece, right? No. Okay, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with this referral. After this was referred, the council voted some sort of statement to instruct the manager to propose budgets at a 5% increase over last year's budget for the elementary school and a 4.81% increase over last year's budget for the region. I guess logically we should somehow incorporate those numbers into this, but the council also rejected incorporating those numbers into this prior to voting a statement to instruct the manager to make those proposals. So I'm really confused. I don't understand what the point of this referral is, given that the manager will already have the current guidelines in the budget book whenever this could potentially get back to the council. Two, beyond that, the council seems to already have made a decision to essentially add an appendix to the current guidelines that does half of what Anna is asking, but doesn't actually change the guidelines. So I don't know where to start.
So I see Andy's hand is up. I would echo what you just said, but let's hear what Andy has to say.
I echo it too. I mean, I found when I started thinking about the meeting afterwards, I think that I was acting out of exhaustion by that point in the evening, and that may be true of others, because the motion, and I looked at the motion sheet that Athena posts after meetings, and what she had recorded it is to, and I think this was my recollection too, to recommend the town manager target a regional school increase of 4.81% and an elementary school increase of 5%. Target is kind of a, what was the intent of the choice of that word? Because it wasn't, when you target something, it doesn't necessarily mandate that it be incorporated. And I remember Paul asking a question of, if I do this, then what are you recommending that gets reduced, in particular around council mandated initiatives? That was my recollection of the evening. So I look at the whole thing, I think that it is confusing, but I agree that referring at this stage, I mean, they're so Paul and Melissa are probably so far along in getting the book ready for printing that it just I don't know what we could do with it to get it back to the council for any action in time to mean anything.
So I'm looking for, Paul's hand is up. I also will speak to this. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you need to make a change to the document, that's fine, but it's not gonna, we're done with our decision making. We're now in a production mode.
So what I think we could do, and this is not having me thought long and hard about this before we opened up for today's meeting, is we could discuss how we want to handle guidelines in the future. And to the extent, one of the issues with guidelines has always been that we don't usually even have second quarter at the point we're doing projections and we're doing guidelines. So we over the last several years, the good news has been that whatever the first percent we picked, the percent has changed in a healthy direction. It's gone up. It started at 3, went to 3.5, or this year it went to 4. So there's been a change after we wrote the guidelines. We've never had a discussion. And this year, one of the things that was being proposed to finance the elementary school side was, rather than going on the base would make it a gift. So bringing it out of reserves or bringing it out of free cash for one-time funds. We've never had any reference to that in our guidelines at all on whenever should we be doing that. So I was thinking we could do a report back that this was referred to us not in time to really do anything, but we had a discussion on how we might handle guidelines in the future, and we didn't come to a conclusion. So that would be a way of me reporting something in a report to the council that we didn't ignore it. So Mandy, that's me rambling on a beginning thoughts of guideline process. That it always feels rushed to me. That we're working with projections and then we're doing guidelines in the middle of projections. But go ahead, Mandy.
I'll start with a thought on what to do with this referral. It was referred. We should have some sort of vote or report back on what to report back. On that, I think my recommendation would be for the council to reject changes to, or however we would word it, not adopt the proposed changes to the guidelines. However, insert an appendix A that notes the subsequent council vote regarding the elementary school budget and the regional school assessment, so that we as a council do not lose that vote when we look at the guidelines next year. Or I guess this fall, however we want it. So sort of add just an addendum. It's not an appendix, it's an addendum to the guidelines that notes on X date the council voted to whatever that language was that we voted on the 14th or the 6th or 8th or whatever the April meeting was. As for process next year, I think Anna is right that the guidelines have been produced by us without any discussion really with the other 3 entities that we're trying to give guidelines to. And then we tend not to revisit them. And that I know the guidelines are useful in January. This goes to Kathy's point of we're doing it with imperfect information. We have to, because somehow the heads, the superintendent, the library director, and Paul must begin developing a budget, and they kind of want some guidance on what we're likely to pass, right? And so we have to do it with imperfect information, but I think we could be doing it a little more collaboratively that may not result in what resulted this year. But how do we do that when none of us have any information about how bad anyone's budget could be? So maybe that's the guidelines are preliminary guidelines, that in early February, there's always a BCG meeting to discuss any potential changes to those guidelines that then would be brought back to the council once all departments, all major areas, and even capital have a better idea of how tough the year is going to be, and what sort of any bridge funding that might be necessary because of things going in or to consider, or what other things are looking at, what the health insurance, will have health insurance rates kind of by then, right? Since we get them in late January, we'll know the governor's budget by then, that maybe we just need to start actually having a BCG meeting that meets in person. Because Zoom, I must say, I agree with the library director when she says it's been detrimental. I think BCG is detrimental meeting only on Zoom. And that starts actually having those conversations and reporting back to the council changes that it would like to see in the guidelines because of X, Y, and Z, instead of just using BCG as a talking body that talks at each other but not with each other.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar. I want to see, I don't think we can change the guidelines this year. I mean, I think we can put an addendum in, but the budget is what the budget's going to be. And the proposed budget, we need to sort of go up yay or nay on the budget itself. I would like to know what the long-term implications are for changes in the allocations from equal to unequal at the start. I mean, I think that would have significant changes in how we develop our budgets and how we actually what we actually spend and where we spend it. And I think I'd like to see that before changing our practice of equal allocation. I'd like to know what that is. I agree with Mandy that BCG is probably the appropriate body, but we need to really have BCG operate like it should, which is to really look at the budget and say, we got to put more money over here, we got to put less money over here, or we can afford to put less money over here. And then whether that comes back as revised guidelines or just as guidance to the town manager and to the regional schools and to the school superintendent, I can, or the library, I can go either way on that. But I do think BCG or some body like BCG needs to take a hard look at the allocation of the revenues that we have to see whether it's equitable, given the needs. So I do, but I think changing at this point is kind of meaningless.
Andy?
Yeah, do a little history here. Bertie can plug in too because he's lived through this also. In the town meeting days, the process wasn't really all that different, though BCG was very different. And I think that's sort of the point that you're getting to just from your observation of the current experience. Because what happens is in the end, it doesn't change. You can start making projections in the fall, but they're going to be affected by the governor's budget, what the legislature does with the governor's budget, and health insurance, which usually doesn't come in at the time that you begin the financial projections. And we would make, and the idea is where it came up of having a budget coordinating group to begin with was partly around making sure that the process worked well in scheduling, and partly it was because you wanted to hear if there was exceptional problems that were just out of the ordinary for any of the groups, that could be any of the major functional areas. You could make changes to by adding or for one functional area if you needed to, but you would always start with even, and you would usually end up hearing to even unless there was really an exceptional one-time circumstance that required something different. In the meetings, because everything was in person then, hadn't yet invented Zoom, really did provide the opportunity that Sharon was talking about, where each of the people on a more personal level, who is the chief executive and financial officers, would talk about anything that was exceptional within their area. And that allowed some discussion to occur amongst the groups. And I think that there was enough of a confidence in each other that you'd realize that if you helped out another group this year, that they would come back and help the next year. But you'd always try and start with even so that you could adhere to that. I think one of the problems that we need to talk about, and I'll conclude with this, is that we've all recognized that the schools seem to be perennially in a situation where, by measuring level services, that they are going up at a faster rate than revenue goes up. And that is creating an untenable situation over a long period of time. And it's getting, I think, to the critical stage now.
Paul, and then Bernie. At least that looks like the order of the hands. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think the role of BCG deserves really. It was interesting to have this come up and to Anna bring it up. I think it really deserves careful thought, because it's not, the council is not just one of three parties. The council is the appropriating authority. And so you have an outsized weight, but the BCG is sort of a tripartite board that is unlimited in numbers. You know, everybody could send everybody to the meeting in some ways. There's no definition of numbers. And so I just think that, and it, you know, so you could have budget guidelines that are approved by the library and the schools that are not in alignment with what the council wants. So I think the dynamics are different than the previous, under the previous form of government, where the finance committee had a role and the select board had a role, and because ultimately town meeting was the appropriating authority. Since the council is the appropriating authority now, you have an outsized weight, but you're giving away some of that authority in a way to a group. And so I just, it might mean that we should look at the charge of the BCG. Yeah, so I think as you think about this, I think it's a really worthy thing to think about, and I think that there's some criticism to be had in terms of how while we have the conversations with our partners, it's not as robust as I think our partners would like to have us, in terms of how much the need is, in terms of, you know, we've been floating along with the equal percentages things, but that's been called into question. I think that's something that council should really think about as well.
Bernie.
I guess I'd just like to point out that the guidelines are guidelines. They're at worst a PDF documents that's difficult to amend as opposed to carved in stone. So that from my perspective, having the guidelines come out from the council, from the manager, and from the finance committee at the start of the budget year gives everybody targets that they should hit. I would not at that point want to get into an argument about equity, because can tell you from experience that everybody deserves more than they're getting, and that would be the argument. So having the guidelines come out, having people try to conform to the guidelines as carefully and as closely as possible, and then allowing reality to set in between the issuance of the guidelines and the final vote on the budget, is what's happened this year, what's happened in previous years, what would happen somewhat surreptitiously at town meeting. Someone would decide that something needs some more money, so it would get voted somehow. And that always threatened to upset the guidelines. So I don't see the practicality in trying to change things right now. I do think that having the budget coordinating group better defined and having more robust discussions in that group would be helpful. I think we need to move forward with the proposal, the budget guidelines coming out. When they do, understanding that they're just that, they're guidelines, they're guardrails. And folks should do the best they can to conform to those. If they can't for some outstanding reason, then let's have the council discuss and debate that and make changes. I'm impressed with the length of the memo that's before us in terms of changes, but I really think it's the wrong time to put that forward. And I think the system that we have now is self-correcting and really doesn't need to have major revisions.
So I'm gonna see whether I can summarize some of what I heard and then add some thoughts. I think the BCG itself, and Mandy, you were on the drafting committee of the charter, or you were the drafter of the charter. We borrowed an entity from a different structure, as Paul just pointed out, and then kind of just took it and plunked it in. When I first ran for council, I was trying to figure out what it was because it didn't look to me. I looked over at the finance committee, then I looked at BCG, and I thought, wait a minute, one group is overseeing the whole budget, and then there are these other parts. So the two groups, the entities that need to be meeting earlier or more often are the schools and the council. You know, it's two subgroups, and in terms of, and the council not so much as representing the town as a piece of it, but trying to understand what is going on in the schools and how it, and then the schools understanding how much money we have in the budget, you know, that it's, you know, how much revenue, you know, where is the money coming from? So it's that kind of effort. It's not so much a decision-making body as trying to make sure that people are grounded in the same financial reality, I guess would be the way I would think about it. And so I think we might want to take a look at however we've written up the BCG, because I think Anna is reading the words accurately in terms of the way they were written, but it may not be the role. But that said, I heard two different potential recommendations. Number one is that we recommend that the council not adopt the proposed changes to the guidelines, but we do insert an addendum that references the vote we took on April 7th, and then I'll write that out, namely the two schools, and I'll get the exact motion. So that's recommendation number one. The second one was be thinking about the process of the guidelines, and that the initial guidelines are coming out in the fall, and then we start meeting earlier with whatever we call the BCG process. That was the second recommendation I heard. And I personally wouldn't want to put many more words into the second one on what do we mean by that, and then try to have a longer discussion of what do we mean by that. Because BCG is called when the indicators come out, but it's not a discussion. It's more, here's the amount of money we've got, and this is where we're going in terms of revenue projections. But no one really sits down and says, where do these revenue projections come from? Where are they uncertain? You know, what's happened in the past? Where are we on shaky grounds? You know, that, and so those were the two concrete ones, rather than a long paragraph on it. So Mandy, I was trying to simplify the second idea to not get into all the bells and whistles of what this might, because I know Anna has talked about a potential fiscal committee. We've got another proposal from one of the regional to do something just meeting with the regional schools early. And Paul had originally proposed a way of setting up a meeting. So there are a lot of variations on understanding the circumstances we're in earlier that have been floating around. I'll stop speaking.
So just a little history. The reason the BCG is in the charter and all that language is in the charter. So I'm not sure, I haven't looked at the charge of BCG in a while, but I think it basically mirrored the charter language, which you can't really change then because it's the charter at this point. That doesn't mean as the charter review committee looks forward, we could ask them to look at this item. The goal at the time was understanding that the town's finances were in good shape and had been managed extremely well within the structures we had at the time in the town format. And we wanted to keep those structures in place to continue essentially to try and ensure that the town's finances would continue to be managed well and looked upon across the state as a well-managed financial town in a way that talks to each other and all of that. So that's what the Charter Commission was trying to do with ensuring that the BCG continued. It did struggle with what does the language look like of defining what BCG is. Paul makes an excellent point, though. When the Charter Commission was doing this, in some sense, we recognized that the town council, if the charter was adopted, would be, town meeting becomes the town council. But I don't think we'd fully internalized that town meeting didn't really sit on BCG. Finance committee did. The final decision-making body wasn't on BCG in a sense, and here now it is. So that internalization, and I think so. I think the manager makes a great point that difference is part of the struggle with BCG. I actually, in thinking a lot about the Four Towns meeting, I actually think that's also part of struggle at Four Towns, that the town council is the only body at Four Towns of the Four Towns that actually is the yes/no body, versus a recommending body. And I think that difference is creating a little bit different of expectations at Four Towns too. I think the BCG idea of coordinated budget guidelines is good. What does coordinated mean? As far as I can tell, we might be the only body adopting guidelines. I have not been able to, and talking with school committee members, I have not heard that either of the school committees adopt budget guidelines, and I haven't really heard that from the library, but I could be wrong with the library. Yeah, what do we go to the council with? I think we go to the council potentially with a pared back, the role of BCG needs looked at. Recommend that the Charter Review Committee look at it. But also maybe recommend some times that BCG should be meeting. And the charter says the manager calls the meetings. But yeah, that financial indicators takes care of most of what BCG is supposed to do, because it presents a budget timeline. It presents the indicators, the expectations. I think the budget timeline itself could be something that BCG works on. However, there's not much I'm not sure we can do with the budget timeline. There are state laws that indicate when the region has to propose its budget that is separate from when our charter indicates the region must propose the budget. Those are two different dates, and you can't change the state law. And right now the charter's the charter on when all four people present budgets. And I think that discussion where we're getting as a council imperfect information from, in some sense, the manager, and it's not the manager's fault. And Paul, I don't want you to think it is, because it's not. When in some sense, all the other budgets are a month plus ahead of the town's budget, and therefore we're getting a lot of pressure from all the other three areas because they're a month ahead and they're asking us to make decisions when we don't know what Paul is going to propose, because he doesn't have to propose it yet. And that might be worthy of a discussion at the council on how to handle that as it relates to the budget timeline. Because I think that's been in for me as a counselor, part of a frustration is we are getting a lot of pressure to modify guidelines, modify things, accept budgets before we have all the information, frankly, I think we should be entitled to, but that Paul should be entitled to take all the time he's entitled to under the charter too. And how do we respond to that pressure in a consistent manner? is probably worth a discussion at either the council or a future finance committee discussion.
So that's longer than my 2 sentences, but that's all right. The first part would require a vote. The first part is recommend that we not adopt the proposed guidelines, but we insert an addendum recognizing the vote taken on April 7th, and then I'll write what the vote is. So if we want to do a motion on that and a vote on that, then the second part would maybe it says begin a discussion on the guideline process, the timing of the guidelines, and the role of the BCG, and set a time where we can have a thorough discussion of it. And then I can put, I think the observation, as you said, Mandy, it was very accurate and insightful that we're in an entirely different world. We don't have 120 people from town meeting sitting at the budget guideline discussion the way it used to be the finance committee. And then the decision makers about the whole budget saw it in that spring. And that's a fundamentally different, both fiduciary responsibility on the council side, but it's a power dynamic and a knowledge in a way that we can't actually make decisions until we know more. You know, we have to see the bigger picture before we can make individual decisions. And so somehow I'll write a sentence that this is just very different, and then we have to grapple with can we create a process that works better? And I recognize that Bernie is on the Charter Commission. You know, we could take a look at the wording that is there and say, to what extent should it be revised? And I've never really looked at it closely. You know, when I ran, I thought I needed to be on the Finance Committee, on the Budget Committee, and on the JCP, because it looked to me like they were all making decisions about the same thing. That's the way I read them. You know, the language, it was all, the whole budget was in. So trying to think about what that role is. So Andy, so I have it in 2 parts. The one is to take a vote on this, and the other is more simple, to start looking at the process of guideline development, meet earlier with the BCG, but have a longer discussion about the role of the BCG, with a few sentences that say, this is different than when we had town meeting. That's what I will write up in something that's somewhat more eloquent. Andy.
Yeah, actually, I went back as we were talking and pulled out the charter to look at that sentence and exactly what it says. And as I did so, I'm coming to the realization that maybe we ought to do what is done in Northampton and other places, which is suggest that the council consider making a recommendation to the charter committee about the item we're talking about. The wording that's troubling in it is in that one sentence in the charter, which is section 5.2 of the charter. The role of this group shall be to review the financial conditions of the town, revenue and expenditure forecasts, and other relevant information prepared by the town manager in order to develop coordinated budget guidelines and calendar, and to coordinate the process of budget development. And there's a couple of different ways to look at it, but I'm not sure how we parse that out, because it says, again, in order, providing information to the manager in order to develop coordinated budget guidelines. Maybe in the end, our guidelines should be to make a recommendation to the manager in December that he issue guidelines to the other groups, or maybe it's that we ask through Bernie that the committee Charter Review Committee look at that sentence.
Yeah, so Andy, I'll let Ernie, rather than talk specifically, I think if I write a sentence on, we should take a hard look at those words and figure out whether it fits who we are now, and we may need to recommend changes, without. Bernie, go on. On to you.
On to me. I have been jotting some notes here as we go on with the intent of raising this at one or another of the charter review meetings. I would appreciate, Kathy, I can be perfectly willing to share whatever you send along with the charter review group. I've noted a reluctance to take on the nuts and bolts of the charter, and this is part of it that really we have to talk about, along with some other. Mandy has sent us some wonderful comments. I would invite members of the Finance Committee to send their suggestions, their recommendations for discussion to the charter review. Hopefully we'll get a point where we'll be at a point in the near future where we begin to ask counselors, current and past, for their recommendations, their impressions of the operation of the charter, and for their recommendations around changes that would be helpful. So I'll take I have my short little bits of notes here that I will raise on Thursday as a future agenda topic for the charter committee. And the other thing that's of interest here, that sort of sticks out, is the fact that the charter doesn't reference the regional schools, nor should it. When it talks about Amherst budgets, it talks about it refers to the library, it refers to the elementary school. I think it's going to be very difficult, nor should we necessarily have to amend the charter to conform to regional school rules. That's something that I'm not willing to take up right at the moment, and haven't really given that much thought to.
I just want to point out to Bernie, the reason I raised my hand is the next sentence in the charter does mention regional schools. It may be that it's the only place in the charter that does, but it says the budget coordinating group shall consist of the town manager, representatives of the town council, representatives of the elementary and regional schools as designated by the school committee and regional school committee, and representatives of the library trustees. So that's the one place in the charter where it actually does, apparently, unless Mandy can think of another one.
There's a bunch of them, and most of the time it's when we're telling the manager what he has authority over, and it's except for the authority given to the library trustees, the elementary school committee, and the regional school committee. I think 5.5 mentions it as when the regional budget is due to the manager too.
Okay.
But nothing about anything other than like dates or excluding anything under the authority of the regional school committee from the manager's purview.
I'd like to take part one, which is take a vote on it, so I can have a motion and then a vote. And so I can say, in that context, we had a longer discussion on, and then write up some sentences and get it out to everybody to say, did I capture enough of this conversation to give a sense of what we were talking about? And I have notes. My notes are different kind of notes, Bernie, because sometimes they look at something, look over there, but I have notes, and I'll make an attempt to do it. And as I said, it's that second part to me would not be very long, because it's not, this is what we think we should do. It's more, this is a direction we should be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And in my reference to the charter, the charter defines the trustees, the charter defines the elementary school. It does have mention of relationships with the regional school. So yeah, there's some mentions there, but there's a different relationship between the regional school and the three major town departments, which are defined by and controlled by the charter to some degree.
So I'll make a motion on the first, or Mandy, you started with the motion. Maybe I'll read the motion that I wrote down and see if this is good enough wording. The Finance Committee recommends that the council not adopt the proposed changes to the guidelines, but that the guidelines are amended to include an addendum to note the vote that we took on April 7th regarding the regional school and the elementary school. And I'll put the precise language of that vote in, so that I don't, now that Andy has read me, I didn't remember that we had the word target in there, but I'll put the precise. So that is what I wrote down as the motion.
So
Um,
moved.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second, but I have a question or a
Okay.
comment. I think we should refer to the guidelines as the FY26 guidelines.
Okay.
Because we do it year by year. So let's talk about the specific guidelines.
Okay, so to the FY26 guidelines, the proposed changes to the FY26 guidelines. Okay. Okay, then if we're ready, I'll look for a vote. Bob?
Aye.
Kathy's a yes. Andy?
Yes.
Mandy?
Aye.
Tom?
Support.
Bernie?
Support.
Alicia?
I'm voting yes, but I did just want to preface that I am in favor of amending the budget guidelines, but considering that Paul said that they have already finished their process, the timing just doesn't feel like it makes any sense. And we did take the vote at the council level, so I am okay with this.
Okay, and so Alicia, in the write-up of the discussion, I can say one member said she would have been in favor of changing the guidelines, but since we're at this point in the process, so I'll put wording to that effect. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so then the second part of it is we began a discussion of looking hard at the process of how we develop the guidelines, including an earlier meeting of the BCG period. And we also think we ought to examine the role of the BCG and needs to be looked at in the context of the town council form of government. And I'll add something to that explains why that's important. And I'll draft it, and then everyone can make it sound like it captures what we just talked about. And the good news is the council doesn't meet for a couple of weeks, so I can take what will be a fairly short document. So it has the two pieces. We did the financial order. We did the regional school capital budget. We did that vote, and we did this piece. And then if there aren't any questions, if there are any questions about the budget side, I'll make sure both Tom and Bernie, the day we are told that the budget is available, what Paul does is he puts it up on the town website, and he does give us all the requests if we would like a paper copy of it. So some of us are still compulsively paper copy oriented. And this is what mine, if you can look at it, looks like at the end of the year. It's got tabs in it, and unfortunately it's not bound very well, so some sections start to fall out. And so I still find it easier to look at a paper version of it, but
Isn't that the story of any budget? Over time, some pieces start to fall out.
they start to fall out. So are there any other questions? And I'm hoping people are okay with, on May 6th is the capital improvement plan. And I'm the chair of that committee. Bob is on that committee. So I will know exactly what we recommended. I won't know how many of our recommendations make it into the town managers, but if they're okay, I can be the reviewer of that because if people are comfortable with it. Because this was an unusual year. I'll just let people know it was an unusual year. We made more changes than normal in terms of recommended changes. And we didn't have any guidance that said reduce from 10.5 to 10, so it is still working with a 10.5%. So I think, unless anyone has any other closing pieces, I think we can adjourn at 3:32.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, I'll take a vote. Bob,
aye.
Kathy's a yes, Andy,
Yes.
Mandy,
Aye.
Tom,
Yes.
Bernie,
Support.
Alicia,
Yes.
and Militia. I just want to give you a huge thanks for organizing all those meetings. When I got the little grid that you'd set everything up, it was a real gift to us to know already that you'd already worked with all the departments. So thank you. I know everything else you're working with, including our JCPC committee. So thank you for the extra effort. Very much appreciated.
Thanks.
And we are adjourned at now 3:33.
All right.
Thanks.